Welcome to my channel. My name is Gina, and this is where I like to talk about solved and unsolved true crime cases, as well as missing person cases that I don't feel have gotten enough attention on mainstream media. If you're interested in these cases like I am, I do hope that you will hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell next to the subscribe button so that YouTube notifies you every time I upload new content, which is at least twice a week. Also, if you have a case that you'd like me to look into, please put that down in the comment section. Okay, today is going to be a tough one. It was hard to research, and it's going to be just as hard to listen to, I'm sure. This is the case of Mitchelle Blair. Have you heard of her? I hadn't. A real peach this one is. Mitchelle Blair was born on May 10th, 1979 in Detroit, Michigan. She reportedly had a pretty rough childhood. She was raised by an allegedly abusive single mother. That was a mouthful. According to Mitchelle, her mother would not give affection or very much attention. She was dismissive and ignored her daughter as much as possible. When she wasn't being neglected, though, she was being beaten, according to Mitchelle. There's no proof of these allegations anywhere that I could find. When she was young, she allegedly was sexually assaulted multiple times by both female and male friends of her mother's. When she finally told her mom about what her female friend had done to her, her mother said, quote, "It's over now. What the fuck do you want me to do about it?" Well, what she wanted her to do was confront the bitch. What she wanted her to do was stand up for her or tell her that it was not her fault or everything was going to be okay, any of those things. But instead, Mother of the Year remained friends with her daughter's abuser, and Mitchelle was forced to continue to see this woman every time she came over and popped in for a visit. She lived literally right around the corner. So she saw her all the time, and her mom did absolutely nothing. Her mom was known around the neighborhood as being a tough woman. People were afraid of her, but they were also her friend. Her house was like the party house. Everybody would come over and hang out, but nobody would do her wrong because they were afraid she'd kick their asses. That kind of woman. So Mitchelle expected that when she told her about this abuse, that she would go and beat the woman up or confront her in some way and stand up for her. But she said she chickened out, and the big bad bitch on the block actually did absolutely nothing for her own daughter. It broke her heart. It broke her daughter's heart. My heart breaks for young Mitchelle. The culmination of the constant abuse from her mom and her mom's friends and feeling all alone with her pain had a very, very negative effect on her mental well-being. If your own mother doesn't care about you and can hurt you so deeply, how do you trust anyone ever? Which is why Mitchelle never decided to go and seek counseling to get through what she was going through mentally. She was tough, so she thought. She figured she already got through it on her own, and she was a fighter. So she didn't need any stranger listening to her problems. Why would she trust somebody she didn't know? She can't even trust her own parents. So she never went and got the help that she needed in order to learn how to get over, get past, deal with any of the things. When Mitchelle was in high school, she began dating a boy named Alexander J. Dorsey. I'm going to call him Alex from here on out. In the 10th grade, she became pregnant with Alex's child and dropped out of school. She gave birth to their first daughter, Gabrielle, and then about 3 years later or so, they had a second daughter that they named Stoney. Mitchelle and Alex remained in an on-again, off-again type relationship for quite a while. A lot of drinking, smoking bud, and fighting, and it was pretty toxic. So they were on again, off again, but they did this for quite a while, years. They even lived together briefly. But Alex had problems with alcoholism, and he also had a few criminal convictions and did a couple years in prison. So the two didn't remain together any longer. They broke up and then attempted to co-parent, which it didn't work out, and you'll see how a little later. In 2005, Dorsey was convicted of carrying a concealed firearm. In 2010, he spent 2 years in prison on another gun charge. In 2012, he was convicted of driving while intoxicated. The list goes on and on. Mitchelle then began seeing a man named Stephen Barry, and they ended up having 2 sons together. The first child was Stephen Jr., and the second was Matthew. And they were a couple years apart as well. He, like Mr. Dorsey, had run-ins with the law, so Mitchelle Blair and Stephen Barry's relationship did not last. She ended up being a single parent with 4 children, neither father making any attempts, or very few attempts, I should say, to see their children. Both ended up missing a lot of holidays, almost every birthday, school functions that wasn't on their schedule. They weren't going to waste their time. They lived their lives, and when they felt like it, they would maybe pop in. Or with Alex, he had family members that wanted to see the daughters, so they would keep pestering him until he'd go and pick up his girls and bring them home for the weekend or whatever. So they were both very, very, very far behind on child support payments. Mitchelle didn't work much. Remember, she only had a 10th grade education, and she was also a single mom of 4 kids, so it was kind of hard for her to have a stable, full-time job. And now is where I stopped feeling sorry for Mitchelle, because she had options. She dismissed them, and instead she took out all of her hurt, her anger, her frustrations on her 4 precious children. Mitchelle Blair and her 4 kids lived in a townhouse in the Martin Luther King housing complex in Detroit, Michigan. By her own admission, she would tell her children about the abuse that she had endured as a child. Not so much the physical beatings from her mom, but all about the sexual abuse. She would describe each instance in detail, as well as how it made her feel, the smells, the sounds, the exact things that would be done to her. She told them everything. She told them about her nightmares and her own mother's reaction to finding out. She promised that she would never do that to her children, that if they ever had anybody abuse them, that they needed to come to her and she would take care of it. She was adamant. And she would tell her children that rape was the worst thing that anyone could do to anyone else. Then, on the other hand, she would routinely beat all 4 of her children. The smallest things would set her off. They were always walking on eggshells around her. They couldn't play loudly. They couldn't leave a mess. Their mess. Now, the apartment that they lived in, complete mess. She never picked up. And with 4 kids, you know that there's going to be stuff laying around. Dishes or toys or clothes, dirty laundry. The walls were black. The floors were just covered in debris. There was hardly any food in the refrigerator or cabinets. There was cleaning products in some of the cabinets. It was with the food, like Tide or what have you. The sinks would never get cleaned out, so they were black. The kids were dirty. Their clothes were dirty. They slept on makeshift beds. They didn't have many blankets. Their clothes were ill-fitting, and she'd send them to school that way. And everything, like I said, seemed to set her off. Now, when she was around other people, like the neighbors were over or friends were over, whatever, she'd just yell and bitch at her kids that, shut up or go play or whatever. But when they were alone, she wasn't having it. She ruled that house with an iron fist. And that iron fist hit those poor babies way too often. She would routinely beat them, like I said, but the youngest, Matthew, he got less beatings than the others. Like, she babied him more, and naturally this breeds animosity toward Matthew from the other children. But Matthew got his share of beatings as well, unfortunately. They weren't fed well. She didn't like to cook a meal. The stovetop was so disgusting as far as the dried food and whatever else that was coating it, that even if she would have tried to turn it on to cook something, it probably would have caught fire. I mean, unlivable is how it was described by police officers. In 2002, CPS was called on Mitchelle because her daughters both had visible burns on their hands, which happened because of a punishment for something. I have no idea what, because that information, as well as the outcome of this case, is unknown because for some reason, somehow, by nobody knows who, the case files were destroyed. However, in 2005, CPS was called again. The reason for this was because the two girls, the oldest daughters, when they went to their father's house, his sister was giving them a bath. And during the bath, she noticed what she described as healed whip marks on their back. They were long and they were healed over, but you could tell there was some scar tissue and some darkening of the flesh. And they were told, she asked how that happened, and she was told that their mom hit them with extension cords when they're bad, across their back. So she called their dad into the bathroom and made him look at it, and they were freaking out, understandably so. And CPS was then called. CPS confirmed that there was indeed abuse, but they never removed these children from the home. Mitchelle was supposed to go to counseling and parenting classes, anger management classes, but there's no evidence anywhere that she ever went or fulfilled any of those things that she was supposed to do in order to keep her kids, and yet CPS never followed up, and nothing ever happened to her. No consequences for her whatsoever. So yet again, the kids slipping right through the cracks. The government agencies, the CPS workers, they are so overloaded with cases, and for some reason there's not enough of them being hired. The ones that are being hired are so overwhelmed with all the cases that they tend to pick and choose which ones they're going to actually do any work on and investigate. And a lot of these kids, they're the ones that pay for this, the kids that are left in abusive homes. But yet I know so many cases where CPS has removed children from homes that are not abusive and put all this time investigating people who have exes that are just being malicious or whatever, and they're putting all this time investigating these people and ignoring the homes that have children that are verifiably being beaten and burned and starved and living in deplorable conditions. We really need to work on holding the government accountable. I mean, why even bother having a CPS or DSF or whatever your town calls it if they're not going to do their damn jobs? I don't get that. Anywho, in 2006, she stopped allowing the kids to go visit their father's homes. She stated that they were welcome to come over and visit the children at her home anytime they want to. The reason behind why she says that she stopped letting the children go to their father's homes is because one of the grandpas allegedly was sexually assaulting some of his grandkids and their friends, and it's just a whole bunch of bullshit, unsubstantiated. Nobody ever got a call. There was no reports made against this grandfather. So I'm not even going to say which grandfather or anything, because I believe that the only reason that she stopped letting those kids go over to their father's houses is because she didn't want them to see the marks on these kids, and she didn't want CPS called on her again. And this was her way of controlling the situation in her way. And of course, the fathers did absolutely nothing about it. They just let her get away with it, just like everybody seemed to let her get away with it. In 2006, that's when she stopped letting them go and visit. In approximately 2010, she stopped letting them go to school. She didn't homeschool. Remember, she only had a 10th grade education. And only person that reported it, one teacher. Now, these kids were out of school for 2 years, and only one teacher reported it. And he reported it, and then he retired. But then he called back to check in and make sure that something was being done, that this child that was a student of his, it was one of the girls, was a student of his, and he was checking to make sure that she came back, and she hadn't. So he called to report it a second time, and what he was told was, absence is not a crime in Michigan. And yet again, the system fails those kids. In later testimony, it was said that the last time that Mr. Berry saw his son Stephen alive was in April of 2012. And the last time Mr. Dorsey says he saw his daughter alive was the beginning of 2013. Both fathers stated that every time that they went to visit, they were told their child was not home or that the child didn't want to see them. But the other child was allowed to visit, like go outside and talk to him, but they couldn't go anywhere with him. They wouldn't allow the fathers in the house. And that's only the times that the door got answered. Like, they would come to the door and knock, and they'd hear life going on in there. The walls are thin. They can hear you in there. No answer. So what do? Do they call the police and say, hey, I'd like to see if my kid is okay in there? I haven't seen my child in a good bit, months, years, even just weeks. Like, if I can't talk to my kid for weeks, I'm going to be on the damn phone. I'm not just going to walk away and go home. But these guys, it was either too much energy to give a shit, or because they were so far behind on child support that they were afraid that she was going to turn him in. Whatever the case may be, they did nothing. Over 2 years of excuses, and they did nothing. In mid-August of 2012, Mitchelle came home and was greeted by her eldest daughter, Gabrielle, who was about 15 at the time. Gabrielle had been babysitting her siblings. She told her mom that she walked into Matthew's room and saw him playing with his toys in a bad way. She told Mitchelle that he was having one boy action figure humping on another boy action figure. And Mitchelle immediately went to Matthew and started grilling him. Where had he seen that behavior? Had somebody done that to him? Who touched him? When did it happen? Why are you doing these things with your dolls? Where did you learn that? Was it your dad? And all this stuff. And then finally, Matthew, by the way, he was 5 or 6 at the time, stated Stephen, his 9-year-old brother, had done that to him. He described to her multiple times that his brother allegedly abused him. He said he was peed on consistently anytime. They had bunk beds and they shared a bedroom, the 2 boys. And he said that whenever his brother would wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning, rather than going to the bathroom, in the bathroom, he would climb down off the top bunk and piss on his brother Matthew. Mitchelle was pissed because she thought that Matthew was a bedwetter, so she had put these plastic sheets down to protect the mattress, and she couldn't believe what she was hearing. But it got worse. Matthew stated that he was raped in the booty with his face pressed down into the bed where he couldn't breathe because of the plastic mattress, or plastic bed sheets on the mattress. And he said that they would tie, that his brother Stephen would tie something around his neck, and so he couldn't breathe and it hurt while he was doing things that hurt his booty. He said that he had peed, quote unquote, in his face, and it was sticky, and it was white, and it was gross. He said he'd hit him in the eyes with his genitals. He would poke him in the ear with it. He would, at meal times, if there was meat and vegetables on the plate, he would steal all the meat, and he would only let Matthew eat the vegetables. Though it went on and on, the list of things that supposedly Stephen had been doing to his brother Matthew. Enraged, Mitchelle snatched up Stephen and started punching him. She kicked him. She beat him with wires and wire hangers, the broomstick, extension cord. She put plastic bags over his head and suffocated him till he passed out, and then woke him up and did it again so that he would know what it felt like to not be able to breathe with his face in plastic. She tied rope around his neck and literally lifted him up off the ground until he would pass out and drop him, so that he would know what it felt like to have something tightly around his neck and can't breathe. She punched him, like I said, kicked him, stomped on him. She starved him. She took him into the bathroom, and she stated to the judge when she was in court later, she said, the water in my apartment would get extremely scalding hot. So she would let it run until it got the hottest it could get. And she'd have him standing in the tub naked. And she would put that scalding hot water on his anus and his genital area and burn him so that he couldn't use that area to hurt his little brother anymore. She said it burned him so bad at one point that the skin slid off of him. The skin slid off. And then she started beating him again. And this went on for almost 2 weeks. Eventually, after about 2 weeks of this torture, on August 30th, 2012, his little body could take no more. He passed away. She then told Matthew that she was going to have to turn herself in. She said Mommy's going to have to pay for what she did. She didn't mean to kill him. But just remember, I stood up for you. And little Matthew begged her not to go and cried. And she started thinking he had already been through enough already with this abuse from his brother. So, according to Mitchelle, she did not want to make her little baby Matthew suffer any further by losing his mom. So, she took Stephen's favorite blanket and wrapped his little body in this blanket and placed him in the deep freezer that was located right next to the kitchen. Pretty much, you'll see pictures in a minute. I'll post them up here. The kitchen, there was a fridge right here, and then right on the other side of the fridge, kind of in the living room, was this deep freezer. And that's where his body went and would stay for about 2.5 years. Mitchelle stated in court that she didn't really mean to kill him. She just wanted to punish him and show him how it felt to be abused in that way. And had she meant to kill him, she'd be damn proud of it and would admit to that. Because even though she didn't mean to kill him, he deserved to die. He was a demon. If that's not horrifying enough, there is more. About 9 months after she tortured and murdered her son Stephen, Matthew allegedly, this is all according to Mitchelle, there's no evidence that Matthew has ever been physically abused by anybody other than his mother. However, allegedly, Matthew revealed new information to his mom and stated that her 13-year-old daughter, Stoney, had been molesting him as well and never stopped even though Stephen died. Matthew told her that she is actually the one who started the whole thing, that she was molesting Stephen as well, that after molesting Stephen and beating Stephen, they would gang rape Matthew. He stated that Stoney had taken a maxi pad that was used and squeezed the blood out of it into his mouth and eyes. Naturally, believing her son, she was enraged. Although how she reacts is almost exactly the same way that she reacted with Stephen. She would punch her, she kicked her, she got a 2x4 and cracked her so hard in the face it split her above the eyebrow. She beat her in the head so much that she barely had a scalp left. There was so many hemorrhaging and hematomas on her head. She interrogated her throughout the beatings. She beat her tailbone and her back with the 2x4 and with the extension cord. She kept on doing this and asking Stoney if it was true. And if you get beat enough or you're scared enough, you're going to admit to shit whether it's true or not if you think that maybe the beatings will stop. So Stoney stated that it was true and that she had done it because she hated both her brothers, but especially Matthew because, quote, everyone thinks he's just so cute, unquote. Again, this is according to Mitchelle. When Mitchelle heard that, she felt justified for what she was doing because finally, Stoney admitted to her mother that this had been happening. So she took the irons that you iron clothes with, a hot iron, and she smashed her back and her head with that. She plugged in her curling iron for her hair, and when it got hot, she vaginally and anally raped her daughter with the hot curling iron. She put her in the same tub with the scalding hot water and burned her genitals and poured it over her head. She made her drink Windex. She would allow her a spoonful or two of oatmeal per day, and that was it for food. She stomped her stomach. She burned her all over her body and continued punching her and hitting her with objects repeatedly. She put plastic bags over her head and suffocated her. And she strangled her with a black shirt. After, again, approximately 2 weeks of torture, Stoney unfortunately succumbed to her injuries. Mitchelle then had her oldest daughter, Gabrielle, place Stoney's naked body, except for a scarf that was around her neck, into that same deep freezer, laid her on top of her little brother, and closed the door. For 2 damn years. 2 damn years those kids remained in that freezer. And that freezer remained in the home that Mitchelle and her 2 surviving children lived in. And those 2 children had to keep that horrifying secret, had to live in fear that they were going to end up in the same freezer that their brother and sister was in. Now, the oldest daughter, she became very protective over Matthew. She would take the blame for pretty much anything Matthew would do. She would not want to go anywhere or do anything because she didn't want to leave Matthew's side, because she was so afraid that her mom was going to end up killing Matthew, that she just stayed right there, and she took the most of the beatings, but the beatings continued on the 2 surviving children. Jumping forward now to March 24th, 2015, 2 years later. Mitchelle and her 2 kids are at the neighbor's apartment babysitting. Mitchelle says it's because she knew that the bailiff was coming to remove their belongings from their apartment because they were being evicted and she wouldn't get out, so they would physically remove her and her belongings. And so rather than have the children witness it, although I think it's just she was too embarrassed and didn't want to be there, because since when did she give a shit what her kids are feeling? But anyways, she was at her neighbor's apartment babysitting while the bailiff entered their apartment. They were being evicted. The bailiff was there to gather their things and remove them from the unit. What was supposed to be a routine eviction turned into an absolute nightmare when he opened up the deep freezer and saw a frozen, naked little girl. And obviously the police were called. And it wasn't until later that they realized there was a second body underneath that little girl, one of even smaller, broken little boy, and he was wrapped in the blanket. Before an autopsy could be done, it took 2 days to thaw their bodies out. CPS, obviously, thank goodness, took custody of the 2 living children, and Mitchelle Blair was arrested and charged with 11 different crimes. They weren't quite sure how the children had died. They had to wait for the autopsies on that. And once the autopsies came back, it was listed as homicide for both children. And her charges, Mitchelle Blair's charges, were added on to, including intentional homicide and a few others. But when they took the 2 children, the living children, they did multiple interviews. No allegations of sexual assault came from Matthew nor his sister, Gabriella. And they did take him to the doctor and have him checked. There was no evidence that he had ever been sexually abused. There was no scarring or tearing in the anus area. However, they did make sure to state that because the child that was supposedly raping him was 9, he wouldn't have been big enough to cause any kind of scarring or tearing. And so it's not 100% sure whether or not Matthew was ever sexually abused. However, both Gabrielle and Matthew had massive amounts of injuries on their bodies. They had Gabriella had like 30 bruises that were at different ranges of healing. So some were new, and some were a lot older and almost healed. And if you know anything about bruises, when they're brand new, you sometimes can't even see them at all. But then as they start healing, they get darker. So their backs were covered. They were also covered with the same type of marks that I described earlier from being whipped with an extension cord. Both children did express fear of their mother. They were afraid to talk about her because they were afraid they were going to go back, because this isn't their first rodeo here. They've been talked to and interviewed by CPS before and always given back to mom. So if they talk bad about mom and then they're given back, what's the abuse going to be like then? So they had to be convinced and reassured that they were not going to go back with their mom before they would explain the kind of horrors that they had to deal with in that house. They were both grossly underweight and malnourished, and the house, the conditions they were living in were deplorable. Police officers called it unlivable, and there'll be pictures probably right now posting above my head, showing you what kind of living conditions and what the apartment looked like. In June 2015, Mitchelle Blair pled guilty to intentional homicide and felony murder, and all other charges were dropped. She stated in court that she was protecting her baby from those demons and would gladly serve life. She said if there was a death penalty, she would gladly die for what she did because she knew it was something that she had to do and she did the right thing. She said she has absolutely no remorse, and if given the chance, she would kill those demons again. Her words, not mine. She stated that she's glad they're dead. She stated that she only has 2 kids. The other 2 weren't even worth the memory. She was sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole, twice. And this was to be served at the Hearn Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. In 2019, it was reported that Mitchelle had accumulated 49 write-ups for incidents of bad behavior and outbursts while in prison, as well as 2 new charges, by the way, that earned her 2 additional sentences of 38 months to 5 years each. Not that it really matters because she was doing life without parole, so no wonder she can just do whatever the hell she wants in there. Again, no more repercussions, because why? She's already doing life. What are they going to do to her? Give her more time? Yeah, that's exactly what they did. Give her more time. And here are the 2 offenses that she got more time for. One was for, she's being escorted down the hall by a guard. An inmate on the other side of the hall is getting escorted by a different guard, and she starts yelling obscenities at this other inmate. So the guard that's escorting her tells her to knock it off. And she turned around and punched him in the arm, in the stomach, in the chest, until they had to tackle her and drag her ass away back to a cell. So there's that one. And then the next charge, this dirty bitch, she was in a cell. It's called PC, protective custody. It's just a little cell. You have a toilet and a mattress, if you're lucky with a mattress. And there's a slot in the door. The slot opens up, they slide your food tray in, and when you're done eating, you slide it back out. Okay? Apparently, somehow, they gave her Pringles in a Pringles can when she's in PC, which blows my mind anyways. But she takes this Pringles can. Get this. She fills it with her urine and feces and waits for the guards to open the little slot to come get her tray. And when they open the little slot, she throws the feces and the urine into the guard's face. It gets in his mouth, his eyes, his nose. And yeah, what the fuck? That's all I can say for that. What the fuck? Moving on, there was a court hearing to see, CPS wanted to legally take away Mitchelle Blair's rights to those children. She can't exactly be a mom when she's not ever getting out of prison, right? So they wanted to also take away, though, the rights of their fathers. Now, one father kept his rights. He kept his parental rights, and the other one didn't bother to show up to court, so he lost his. Alex is the one, he got to continue to see his daughter. However, by the time the case was over, his daughter, Gabrielle, was 18 anyways, and she had a right to choose whether she saw her dad or not, so it was kind of a moot point, but at least he showed up and he fought for her. Finally, it took him long enough. It took him losing a daughter to start fighting for his other child. The other father decided that, he'll be around when the kids are grown. If they want to come and look him up, they can look him up, but he was done fighting. He was done. So I guess he probably, somewhere I read, and I'm not sure if this was actually a quote or if this is what somebody said they heard him say. So it's probably just a rumor anyways, but he said Matthew is probably too fucked up in the head right now anyways, and he needed more of a parent than he could provide him. Which, if ever he was honest, that would be the time. Because thank goodness he said, look, I'm not equipped to deal with this child. Give him to somebody who can help him. And thank goodness he did, because now that now that Gabrielle and Matthew had endured already all this unspeakable abuse, but now they are thriving. Matthew was adopted by his great aunt. Gabrielle is grown. She finished high school. She did some college. I can't find out where she's living now, but I'm kind of glad, because I think she needs her privacy and time to heal without all this attention. Matthew is said to have neurological developmental issues from living in severe terror, but he is getting help for that with a psychologist and lots of counseling and lots of love and support system, and he's healing. Are they ever going to forget the damage that was done to them? Of course not. Could you? But at least they're getting much needed help, and they're loved and they're cared for, and they have absolutely zero contact with Mitchelle Blair. I would like to say a couple of things before I go. First off, even though I believe that Mitchelle Blair was abused as a child, that in no way gives her an excuse or any kind of license to do to her children what she did. Many, many, many people go through horrific childhoods and don't commit murder later, let alone torturing and murdering your own children. Abuse is a vicious cycle. For those who seek help, that cycle can be broken. Now, did she ever take her son to the doctor to see if he actually was abused? No. Did she ever call the police or a counselor or anybody to help her get help for these children if they were molesting Matthew? Not exactly. She stated in court that one time, right after she found out about Stephen, before beating him to death, she called the police and said, hypothetically, if somebody has two sons and one is raping the other, what would happen to the children? Would you take him to jail? How would that work? And the officer said, well, actually, this is a case for CPS. And she said, it's just hypothetical. And he said, well, CPS would take both children, do an investigation, and go from there. Is this something that's happening in your home? And she said, no, it's happening to a friend. And hung up. Well, she didn't want to lose Matthew. So rather than getting help from anybody, she took it upon herself to be judge, jury, and executioner. And I understand from a psychologist's point of view how you want to protect your child from abuse. I understand that not getting the help for your own trauma when you were a child, and then finding out that same trauma happened to your child, I could see how that would affect you. as a person. I cannot condone or understand even how somebody for 2 weeks could torture and then murder their own children, let alone anybody's child or any human being. I wouldn't do that kind of behavior to a dog. Like, there's something wrong with her up here. And at this point, I don't give a shit if she gets help for it or not. She could rot in hell for all I care. Those babies deserve better. And I'm glad that at least 2 of them got out and were saved. The system failed those children. And as much as Mitchelle Blair was absolutely fucking responsible for what happened to those babies, it could have been avoided. And our system is just so broken. And I wish I had the answers, and I wish I knew how to fix it. Anyways, thank you for sticking with me through this one. I know it was really hard one to listen to, even harder to process. If you think a child is being abused, please report it. It's so much better to be safe than sorry. Unfortunately, sometimes when we report these things, nothing is done. Don't give up. You can report it to a different agency. There are numbers that you can call. I'm going to put in the description portion of this video. You can remain anonymous. You can call multiple different agencies if you have to, but it could save a life. So many people failed these children, and I hope that hearing this case inspires even one person out there that has kept their silence, to speak up. You could very well be saving a life. This is horrific, and it's something that never ever had to happen. There are also numbers that I'm going to be posting down there in the description area if you need help, if you've been abused, if you feel like you can't cope and you're hurting someone else or yourself. These numbers, please call. You can get help. There's help out there. There's no need for any of this to ever happen. I'm going to go now. This has really taken its toll on me, this case here. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. Please stay safe out there, y'all. I'll see you soon.